After a bit of a hiatus, we are back with another Friday Reads video here on the channel. And the way that I like to do Friday Reads is I like to find a headline that has something to do with literature so that each episode has some bit of something in it that is sort of meaty to chew on. Then I'll talk a little bit about the reading that I've been doing lately, and then we will end the show with some questions. So, guys, if you have any questions for the next Friday Reads, let me know in the comments section below, and I will address those on a future iteration of the Friday Reads on the channel. Now, getting right into it. I found a list. It was suggested to me on my Google homepage, Stephen King's 10 favorite books, 10 favorite novels. And the article in which I found them had them numbered. I found a different source that had the same books but with different numbering. And knowing what I know about Stephen King, having read Danse Macabre and looked at the section where he talks about the movies that he was inspired by, the books he was inspired by, it is unlikely, in my opinion, that Stephen King went and numbered them 10 through 1 anyway. So in the list that I have provided here, we have taken out the numbering, but I have added a paragraph from Wikipedia on each of them that summarizes the novel. I have tried to take the best paragraph from the entire article that kind of gets the gist of what it is that the book does. So, starts with American Pastoral by Philip Roth, a 1997 novel. And what is American Pastoral about? The framing device in American Pastoral is a 45th high school reunion attended by frequent Roth alter ego Nathan Zuckerman, who is the narrator. At the reunion in 1995, Zuckerman meets former classmate Jerry Levov, who describes to him the tragic derailment of the life of his recently deceased older brother, Seymour Swede Levov. After Seymour's teenage daughter Mary in 1968 set off a bomb in protest against American involvement in the Vietnam War, killing a bystander, and subsequently went into hiding, Seymour remained traumatized for the rest of his life. The rest of the novel consists of Zuckerman's posthumous recreation of Seymour's life based on Jerry's revelation, a few newspaper clippings, and Zuckerman's own impressions after two brief run-ins with the Swede. In these encounters, which take place early in the novel, Zuckerman learns that Seymour has remarried and has 3 young sons, but Seymour's daughter, Mary, is never mentioned. In Zuckerman's reimagining of Seymour's life, this second marriage has no part. It ends in 1973 with Watergate unraveling on TV, while the previous lives of the protagonists completely disintegrate. This is a book that is... I have not read it. It is confusing to me because what I've read from Philip Roth is really good. Everyone that I know that has read American Pastoral really likes it. Reading a summary of the novel, nothing sounds more disinteresting to me than this. I cannot think of a single novel summary of which I know that sounds less interesting than a guy imagining another guy's life while being sort of weirded out that Watergate is unraveling on TV. Nothing sounds less interesting to me. Literally nothing that I can think of. This sounds absolutely abominable. But again, I like Philip Roth. Everyone I know that has read American Pastoral seems to love it. There must be something there. If I had to guess, it would be the element of Philip Roth himself. Philip Roth is a very slick writer. Another novel here, 1984 by George Orwell, published in 1949. Too bad he couldn't get it out 1 year earlier. The story takes place in an imagined future. The current year is uncertain, but believed to be 1984. Much of the world is in perpetual war. Great Britain, now known as Airstrip 1, has become the province of the totalitarian superstate Oceania, which is led by Big Brother, a dictatorial leader supported by an intense cult of personality manufactured by the party's thought police. The party engages in omnipresent government surveillance and through the Ministry of Truth, historical negationism, and constant propaganda to persecute individuality and independent thinking. This definitely goes with the rest of Stephen King's sort of political leanings, you would think. It also goes back to his days as a hippie. It also feeds, I think, directly into his propensity towards horror, and especially perhaps his propensity towards understated horror. Now, I know what you're saying. Stephen King has some really out there paragraphs when he's talking about the horror in his novels, etc., but sometimes he does it in a very subtle way. And I think that the subtle underpinnings of so I don't think 1984 is written as a horror novel. But guys, it can feel like it, right? With all of the things going on, if you are willing to take a step back and look at the happenings in the novel, it can feel a lot like horror. So I think that is part of what is drawing him to that. Then we have Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, published in 1985. Set in the American frontier with a loose historical context, the narrative follows a fictional teenager from Tennessee referred to as the Kid, with the bulk of the text devoted to his experiences with the Glanton Gang, a historical group of scalp hunters who massacred American Indians and others in the United States-Mexico borderlands from 1849 to 1850. For bounty, sadistic pleasure, and eventually out of nihilistic habit. The role of antagonist is gradually filled by Judge Holden, a physically massive, highly educated, preternaturally skilled member of the gang with pale and hairless skin who takes extreme sadistic pleasure in the destruction and domination of whatever he encounters, including children and docile animals. One of the things that you will get if you read much of Stephen King on other writers, he really does like Cormac McCarthy. There are a few writers that seem to pop up when Stephen King is praising other writers, and Cormac McCarthy might be chief among them. Cormac McCarthy's style is... Cormac McCarthy's style is somewhere between Hemingway and Faulkner, I would say. I think that his characters are very Hemingwayan. I think that his declarative statements are very Hemingwayan. I think that the scope of his novels feels more in the Faulkner camp, in that when you read William Faulkner, you almost feel as if you're reading Shakespeare because things feel bigger than they are. As I Lay Dying is the story of a single family on a single mission, kind of. There's one person, everybody has their own alternatives, but there's one person who overrules everything. But it doesn't feel like a nobody family from Yoknapatawpha County. It feels like the king taking his wayward children. It is a very... I think that Cormac McCarthy novels feel that way as well, but they are sort of, in my experience at least, I haven't read all Cormac McCarthy for sure. The language is not as difficult as Faulkner. The next book on this list is one that I have never heard of which I have never heard. The Hair of Harold Rue by Thomas Williams from 1974. The narrative spine of the novel bridges a long weekend in the life of Aaron Benham, a clinically depressed literature professor at New Hampshire College who has taken a leave of absence to write a novel, also called The Hair of Harold Rue. Williams punctuates the primary plot with frequent flashbacks, a long fairy tale that Aaron had told his children over several nights before bedtime, and the text of the novel within the novel, which is based on Aaron's own experiences in college following World War II. Remember earlier when I said that American Pastoral, there was nothing I could think of that would be less interesting in novel format? This might be the only thing that would top that. I don't want to read about writers. I don't want to read about literature professors. I don't want to read about writers who are talking about their own writing. Yeah. So that might be a no-go for me, Stephen. Thomas Williams. I have The Hair of Harold Rue. I have never heard of that. Invisible Man. So one of the things, though, here that does seem fairy tale, right? Stephen King just published a book called Fairy Tale. The idea of a novel about a novelist, which is something that Stephen King has done from time to time as well. That might be influencing there. You're looking at 1974 as a year of publication. 1974, I believe, top of my head, was the same year that Carrie was published. That was Stephen King's first foray into publication at the novel level. So maybe that is something that is sticking out to him, that it is sort of coincide. Maybe he read this the year that he did not have to work, because the first year he didn't have to work because Carrie was successful for him. Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison, 1952. The Invisible Man is an 1897 science fiction novel. Well, I might have, okay, I just did the wrong thing. I looked up the wrong one. I apologize for that. But I think we know what The Invisible Man is. So again, you're looking at with The Invisible Man an unexpected plight in horror. You're looking at something that is unexpected for the characters involved. The Invisible Man, Ralph. All right, let's see here. Come on. I apologize for this. Invisible Man is Ralph Ellison's first novel and the only one published during his lifetime. It was published by Random House in 1952 and addresses many of the social and intellectual issues faced by African Americans in the early 20th century: Black nationalism, the relationship between Black identity and Marxism, and the reformist racial policies of Booker T. Washington, as well as issues of individuality and personal identity. Invisible Man won the U.S. National Book Award for Fiction in 1953, making Ellison the first African American writer to win the award in 1998. The Modern Library ranked Invisible Man 19th on its 100 best. Okay, so yeah, I am wrong about this one. So yeah. Plot summary: the narrator, an unnamed black man, begins by describing his living conditions: an underground room wired with hundreds of electric lights operated by power stolen from the city's electric grid. He reflects in various ways in which he has experienced social invisibility during his life and begins to tell his story returning to his teenage years. The narrator lives in a small southern town, and upon graduating from high school, wins a scholarship to an all-black college after taking part in a brutal, humiliating battle royale for the entertainment of the town's rich white dignitaries. So that is decidedly different than the H.G. Wells novel, but the thematic parallels will probably be similar. Looking at the horror of invisibility in daily life, right? If that makes any sense, I would imagine that is going to be a theme of Invisible Man as well as The Invisible Man. Lord of the Flies, William Golding, 1954. Lord of the Flies is the 1954 debut novel of British author William Golding. The plot concerns a group of British boys who are stranded on an uninhabited island and their disastrous attempts to govern themselves. The novel's themes include morality, leadership, and tension between civility and chaos. Interesting tidbit here. I've been making content online about literature for just about a decade now, just about 10 years. Older white men love this novel. Stephen King, obviously an older white man. I don't know what it is. I have not read this novel. There is something about this novel that absolutely older white men seem to love. That is an interesting quirk to me. I don't know what it is. I imagine if I had to bet, I would imagine that this used to be a text that was taught in schools. I do not believe any longer that it is. So if it used to be, 1954 being published, it also would have been for many of these individuals, it would have been a new text around their birth, right? So Stephen King was born in 1947. He would have been 7 years old when this novel came out. It is about young boys. It is possible that he read this when he was a child. So actually, that kind of makes sense now. It would have been pop culture at that time. TV had not taken off really. Radio was not an all the time thing for a lot of people, so novels still had a place in Americana. So I imagine that would be the issue, or not the issue, the deal there with that quirk. Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, 1954 as well. The title refers to the story's main antagonist, the Dark Lord Sauron, who in an earlier age created the One Ring, allowing him to rule the other rings of power given to men, dwarves, and elves. In his campaign to conquer all of Middle-earth, from homely beginnings in the Shire, a hobbit land reminiscent of the English countryside, the story ranges across Middle-earth following the quest to destroy the One Ring. Seen mainly through the eyes of the hobbits, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, another novel with a Merry. Aiding the hobbits are the wizard Gandalf, and the men Aragorn and Boromir, the elf Legolas, and the dwarf Gimli, who writes as the company of the Ring in order to rally the free peoples of Middle-earth against Sauron's enemy armies and give Frodo a chance to destroy the One Ring in the fires of the Mount Doom. Not my favorite novel. Certainly not my favorite novel. I am not a fantasy kind of guy. I cannot say that I can diagnose what the influence this novel had on Stephen King's writing. And maybe he just likes it. Maybe it's not something that he uses necessarily for inspiration. Though I will say, who's the guy that lives in the woods in Lord of the Rings? The guy who lives in the woods is kind of an interesting parallel for Pennywise. Who is it here? Surely I can find. So the idea that both of them were technically timeless, both of them had mysterious origins. Tom Bombadil and Pennywise have some interesting sort of parallels. Tom Bombadil, obviously a force for good, whereas Pennywise is maybe a force for evil. Maybe Tom Bombadil isn't a force for good. Maybe Tom Bombadil really is a force for neutrality. And in some ways, I think you could make the argument that as opposed to being evil, Pennywise in It is sort of a force of nature, which kind of removes whether or not something is evil, right? It just is what it is. You don't say a polar bear is evil for eating all of those funny-looking seals. Then, The Orphan Master's Son from Adam Johnson in 2012. The Orphan Master's Son is a 2012 novel by the American author Adam Johnson. It deals with intertwined propaganda, identity, and state power themes in North Korea. The novel was awarded the 2013 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Okay, sounds good. Ship of Fools, Catherine Ann Porter, 1962. Ship of Fools is a 1962 novel by Catherine Ann Porter telling the tale of a group of disparate characters sailing from Mexico to Europe aboard a German passenger ship. The large cast of characters includes Germans, Mexicans, Americans, Spaniards, a group of Cuban medical students, a Swiss family, and a Swede. In steerage is a large group of Spanish workers being returned to Spain from Cuba. It is an allegory tracing the rise of Nazism and looks metaphorically at the progress of the world on its voyage to eternity. Definitely sounds like an interesting take. I don't think I have read any Catherine Ann Porter, though it strikes me she may be a short story writer as well. Perhaps I have read Catherine Ann Porter. Anytime that you're talking about, anytime you're talking about single characters representing groups of people, I get a little bit queasy. But if it is done well, there's nothing from Catherine Porter on the channel, but if it is done well, I can accept it. You're talking about an allegory for Nazism, written in 1962. So you're talking about around 20 years later. That is sort of the same thing as someone today writing about the events of 9/11, writing an allegory for the events of 9/11. So you're looking about at that same type of distance between event and what it is about. Watership Down by Richard Adams. Watership Down is an adventure novel by English author Richard Adams, published by Rex Collings Limited of London in 1972, set in Hampshire, in South England. The story features a small group of rabbits. Although they live in their natural wild environment with burrows, they are anthropomorphized, possessing their own culture, language, proverbs, poetry, and mythology, evoking epic themes. And as themes, the novel follows the rabbits as they escape the destruction of their warren and seek a place to establish a new home, the hill of Watership Down, encountering perils and temptations along the way. Interesting choice to throw in there. So, one thing that really strikes me is not a whole lot of horror on there, and I thought for sure there would be some Shirley Jackson. Stephen King speaks volumes about Shirley Jackson, and seems to really enjoy her work. So the fact that Shirley Jackson did not appear in that list of 10 books is really sort of surprising to me. But again, not a whole lot. So no Shirley Jackson stands out. No real horror novels stands out. That is interesting. You would think that something would have piqued his interest along the way. He had the rise of Stephen King was sort of on his coattails. There were several authors in the sort of 80s and 90s that kind of took off as well in the horror genre. None of those guys in there, and not any contemporaries the likes of, say, Michael Crichton either. In my childhood, it was always the two big authors were Stephen King and Michael Crichton. And didn't read a whole lot of Stephen King as a kid. I started it a couple times. I never finished it. I think I started one of his others, not one of the big ones either, but maybe Cujo. Maybe I started Cujo a couple times and never finished it. But I read several Michael Crichton books in middle school. I read Sphere. I read Jurassic Park. I read Jurassic Park 2, I think. I read... oh, man. I read like 5 of his... The Eaters of the Dead. I read like 5 of his novels in middle school. and really enjoyed them, but no contemporaries on the list for Stephen King either. As for the Friday Reads portion of this video, just about a week ago, we finished up the Love series here on the channel, 14 Love Poems in 14 Days to celebrate Valentine's Day, even though I don't believe in love. But so if I am allowed to be a bit egotistical here, to take pride in something here, I am proud of the way that we got through all 14 of those poems without overlapping types of love, that we got through those 14 poems looking at different iterations of love, different lights being shined on love, and I didn't even turn negative the whole time, at least I don't think, not to the best of my recollection, and you can't prove otherwise. But some really interesting poems there. The Bean Eaters was a fun one. The Sun Rising, I think that was the second time that has appeared on this channel. Love Song for Lucinda by Langston Hughes, an interesting one. Love After Love by Derek Walcott, first time I had ever read that poem. I Carry Your Heart With Me, I Carry It In by E. E. Cummings. I think that was the first time this appeared on the channel, but I'm pretty sure I've talked about it before. So I may have. So if you noticed, one of the videos that went live just a couple days ago, Loveliest of Trees, The Cherry Now by A.E. Housman. It is shot differently than the rest of the poetry videos that have been on the channel for the last 3-ish years. That's because it was shot a very long time ago. I thought I had uploaded it, and I had not. So it was just hanging out on a hard drive. It's possible that there is a video for I Carry Your Heart With Me, I Carry It In, hanging out on a hard drive somewhere as well. But look, we've made videos every day for nearly 2 years now here on the channel, so sometimes things will get lost in the fray. But again, yeah, I was proud of the Love series. One thing that I regret is not keeping up with thumbnails through that series, so I'm going to go back and retroactively fit them with thumbnails, but I think it's a nice looking thumbnail too on that series. But that is kind of where a lot of the reading has been recently, and along those lines. So I Carry Your Heart With Me, I Carry It In, and The Loveliest of Trees, The Cherry Now by A.E. Housman. Those were both poems that were suggested to me by AI. I want to take a minute here and talk about what an absolute win AI has been for me. The world of poetry, the world of short stories, the world of novels is so vast. Look, I'll never get to all of the novels that I want to have series for on the channel. Just never going to happen. Never going to get to all of the short stories I want to have on the channel. The Hemingway read-along that we're doing on the channel now that is going to be talked about next, but that series itself goes back on this channel, let's see, all the way back to August 3rd, 2023. We are now in 2025. We are coming up quickly on 2 years that I've been doing that series, and we're just about halfway through, right? And that's just Hemingway. But if I have a shot at getting all of anything on the channel that I want to, my goal is to read all of everything. Probably not going to happen. But I have a shot to get closer with poetry than with short stories or novels. And right now, there are 641 poetry discussions on the channel. Sometimes I run blank. Sometimes I can't get it figured out what it is that I should read, what I should talk about next. Guys, AI for that has been miraculous. I get to say, hey, what are some poems on love if I wanted to do that? I only used AI to find a couple there. I had most of those poems that I knew I wanted to talk about. The Bean Eaters was one of them. Absolutely delightful poem. Very, very interesting to be able to use that tool in that way to cultivate the poetry that is appearing on the channel. And I know that AI gets a bad rap. I know that AI is the devil and whatnot. I also know that if you ask Chat GPT about which short story was it here? Um, if you go on Chat GPT and you ask about The Arabian Nights by Shirley Jackson, it suggests my video. So very interesting there. But yeah, AI has been a wonderful tool for cultivating what poetry I'm going to talk about because I don't have anyone really suggesting poems in that way. I don't have contact with any of my old professors, none of the people that I used to talk about poetry with. Um, yeah, so AI has been a really useful tool in that pursuit. And if you are looking to cultivate your own readership, look, you don't have to listen to it all the time. You don't have to say, hey, let me take the class of Chat GPT English 101. I'm not saying that. And in fact, a lot of times it hallucinates. So you will get just random poems that don't exist, random short stories that were never written, or novels that have the wrong author attached, things like that all the time. But it provides a good jumping off point, and I think a lot of it is that it's going to be taking titles from often used websites. It's going to be taking titles from syllabi that it finds online and making a very interesting hybrid of those sources. So yeah, I absolutely love what I've been able to do finding poetry with ChatGPT and Grok, by the way, on X. Grok Grok is more accurate, I would say, than ChatGPT when you're talking about titles with authors. I will say that the poetry suggestions from Grok are more cliche than you get on ChatGPT. So take that for what you will. Returning to Hemingway, we have after the long pause in the Hemingway series from reading poetry for a couple weeks there. Returning to Hemingway always feels like going home. I really have to finish the Hemingway series this year. I don't want it to get into a third calendar year. Or no, a fourth calendar year, because it started in 23, went through 24, and here we are in 25. I don't want it to hit a fourth calendar year, so I need to try to pick up the old boots on that one. And finally, we have some questions here. We have questions from MISA. The rest of you have been very lazy asking questions. Why is this? Oh, it kept the numbering from the previous. Okay, I don't care. Question 1. What are your favorite genres of novels to read? Is there any genre that you don't like or wouldn't read even if your life depended on it? So, the closest to the final one is YA. I kind of hate young adult literature. There is the Harry Potter series on the channel that I almost cursed just then, but I sucked it up and trudged through for all 321 books that are in that series. Didn't like a single page of it. Had a YA literature class in college, couldn't stand it. Have read several different YA novels, Twilight, There's one where people clap and they blow up. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Did a video for that book on the channel. Just can't get into it. I don't like it. I think that what happens is, maybe I shouldn't say this. Screw it, I'll say it. I think that what happens is a lot of authors of YA genres, and this comes out in their text. I don't know why I keep couching this statement. Just kind of never grow up. And that's fine. Or maybe they have a hunky-dory idea of what literature is, and that's fine. I just don't like it. My favorite genre, if you will, if it is a genre, is literary fiction, and that is not to be pretentious. Probably it is. But the reason for that is I think that what literary fiction is just literature without fancy plots. Really, that's kind of what literary fiction is. And in my opinion, it's much more impressive if you can write a story and not depend on the fancy stuff to make it interesting. So, for example, we talked about Stephen King. Could you write the story of, what is it? What's the group called? The Losers? The Losers Club? Is that what it's called in the novel? Could you write the story of the Losers Club and make it interesting without Pennywise? It's a much harder text to write. Okay, so is it hard or is it difficult? I think probably it's a more difficult text to write, in that you have to go into much more nuance to make those characters interesting without the ever-loving bad guy sort of hanging out on the outside, the outskirts of town, constantly sending his tendrils into these kids' lives. It is more difficult to write that novel and make it interesting without Pennywise, but maybe it's harder to write it with Pennywise because the sheer imaginative forces have to be larger to have that bad guy in the text. So for me, the difficulty of writing literary fiction is infinitely more interesting. That said, I did mention Michael Crichton earlier. One of the things Michael Crichton is good at doing is not just taking one thing. Stephen King's It has Pennywise thrown into the real world. Stephen King's Cujo has that dog thrown into the real world. Stephen King's Carrie has one girl with telekinetic abilities thrown into the real world. What Michael Crichton did was he gave you the real world, but he threw in cloning and dinosaurs, and then he threw in chaos theory, and he mixed them up. With Sphere, he gave you the real world. He threw in religion and philosophy, also threw in time travel, and mixed it all up. So he is good at throwing in multiple elements and mixing them together in that way, versus just kind of one element into the real world, like for example, a lot of horror does, like a lot of science fiction does. Michael Crichton really took two elements and kind of mixed them together. So literary fiction is the type of literature that I love to read the most, but I'm not against horror. I'm not against those. So, for example, talked about Shirley Jackson earlier. Shirley Jackson runs a fine line between literary fiction and horror. Really interesting line between literary fiction and horror. And that's really fun to read as well. And the final question that we're going to tackle today, you've mentioned that you like comics and that you'd even like to talk more about comics here sometime. Which are your favorite comics and or characters from comics? Have you ever read Japanese comics, manga? And if you have, do you have any favorites in that realm? I have never delved into the world of manga. I do not understand manga. I remember when I first noticed it creeping onto the shelves in bookstores, and I would leaf through it and just not understand what was going on. Um, so no, the manga part I've never really gotten into. Misa, I'm assuming you have some favorite mangas by virtue of asking that very question. So if you have suggestions, go ahead and throw them at me. Maybe I'll start somewhere. But as of now, people love it. I don't know what it is, but people love it. As far as comic book characters, my favorite was always Wolverine. Being a curmudgeon, a short guy, I'm fuzzy now, but I haven't always been fuzzy. And just having a generally nasty disposition, and short. It's obvious why I like Wolverine, and a loner, right? It's obvious why I like Wolverine, but I do think that the complexity of Wolverine. So when I was a kid, I was real big into, for example, Bigfoot and aliens and all of those cryptids and things like that. The mystery of Wolverine's origin really appealed to me. I thought that that was interesting. When you get so far, so several times in the comics, a situation like the movie Logan popped up. So if you haven't seen Logan, absolutely you should. But the situation in Logan, you have a character who hates life and wants to die. That same character is immortal, right? So he wants to die, but he can't die. Then you introduce the element of the story that is killing him. He's going to die, and you give him Laura a reason to live. It's a double cross on your character. Things like that pop up a lot in the Wolverine comic books. Um, I really enjoyed when I was a kid the fact that Wolverine was an underdog, really. The fact that Wolverine, one thing that always appealed to me, you had, for example, Colossus. We have no real evidence that Colossus felt pain when he was in his metal form. You have no real evidence that Iron Man feels pain inside of the suit. Captain America has, I don't know, a shield. But Wolverine feels every bit of pain that he goes through. Wolverine's healing factor keeps him from dying, but he feels all of it. That was always interesting to me. The fact that Wolverine was always sort of he was he was very tactically intelligent, but he was always also kind of stupid. Maybe stupid's not the right term. Um, but he always had the so what attitude, right? So he would just, for example, he would just run headfirst at a villain and get blasted into annihilation, get up and go again. And the team would use Wolverine essentially as a distraction from time to time. Hey, go run into this, and then we'll have the freedom to move around and strategize, right? So that was kind of the first. I mean, when I say a kid, these texts were kind of the first texts that I really kind of mastered. Right? Mastered's probably not the right word, but you know what I mean? Really had a grasp of. And that was the first time that I remember kind of theory of mind in literature. So theory of mind is when children become aware that the other things, the other people they're looking at, those aren't things, they're people. There's other this inside there. That was kind of a moment in literature for me where I really sort of I I imagine a lot of people have this moment too, but I think that it's easy to miss, where you're not just reading the book as a character, You're not just reading the book as the protagonist, but you can see the story from another character's point of view too. Wolverine really did that for me, really opened me up to that sort of thing. That is what I have for this Friday Reads episode. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on the channel, dropping multiple videos every single week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.